operations, they'd have the president's support to do so. But now, with tonight's statement, tonight Middle East time, and then this afternoon here in the United States, a signal that perhaps talks could very well begin in earnest soon. Unclear who, when, over what specifically, because all 20 of those points were quite complex and could take days, if not weeks, to sort out each individually on the path to peace.
Yeah, those 20 points were complex, and I want to ask you, Ed, if you could just sum up some of the biggest points made on that proposal from President Donald Trump to the negotiating table between these two.
I mean, among other things, it was the idea that members of Hamas would renounce their membership in the group, leave their weapons behind, and be given safe passage to other countries. There was stuff like, or key details, including a sort of provisional government or entity that would run the Gaza Strip for a while the Palestinian Authority reconstituted itself. There would be this so-called Board of Peace that would be co-chaired by President Trump and other world leaders, including the former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, to oversee the sort of reconstruction, not only physically of Gaza, but of its political structure. And there would, of course, perhaps most critically and most immediately be an exchange of the hostages, the handful that are still alive, the bodies of those believed dead, and then Israel would in turn hand over hundreds of prisoners that have been taken since October 7th in exchange. So that's the key critical first piece, and then conceivably talks would continue, and you would also begin to see the withdrawal of Israeli defense forces from Gaza. So all of it, again, yet to be determined, subject of great negotiation, but Hamas here signaling in the last few minutes that in fact it is ready to do so, and that should be seen in Israel and here in Washington as quite an encouraging development, and we'll hear at some point probably from the president, whether it's in person or over social media.
You know, the president, Ed, as you know, has made it no secret that he intends to be considered for the Nobel Peace Prize. We know their committee is meeting in about a week or so. What can you tell us about the timing of all this?
Well, you know, you can't self-nominate for something like that. And certainly he has stoked conversation about whether or not he should be considered for something like that. As you said, they are meeting soon. And the White House has gone to great lengths, he himself, especially in recent weeks, really since the summer, to point out that in their view, he has helped settle 7 different conflicts over the course of his first administration and this one. Most recently, the situation in Africa. There's also the one between Armenia and Azerbaijan. There were a handful of other disputes in his first administration, and so they added up and say there have been 7 in different conflicts that he's helped settle. This would be yet another one, and of course the biggest, perhaps most complex, is the one between Russia and Ukraine. Those are the 2 he vowed to settle quickly. He has not been able to do so, of course. But, you know, if indeed talks are set to begin, you could see a renewed push for him to be considered for that, if not this year, certainly next year.
Can you give us some context, though, into the recent conversations between President Trump and Bibi Netanyahu over the past month or so, and how we got to this point?
Well, we got here in part because the president had some pretty significant conversations with leaders of predominantly Arab and Muslim countries in recent weeks in the lead up to the United Nations and while he was at the General Assembly meetings in New York, where they, in essence, reiterated that they're concerned about this. They want to see the resolution of it, made clear that in their view, Israel cannot occupy the West Bank, which is a separate location and situation from the situation in Gaza, and you know, reiterated that the hope of maintaining, sustaining, and expanding the so-called Abraham Accords that were established during his first administration, and that is greater Arab-Israeli cooperation and U.S. engagement in that region, where it would be at risk were this conflict to continue. So with all that pressure, and with the president himself upset with some of the steps that had been taken by Israel, including targeting Hamas leadership when they were in Qatar a few weeks ago for negotiations, Netanyahu came to the White House on Monday, was handed this list of proposals, got on the phone with the leader of Qatar and apologized for that military strike. And then you saw Netanyahu pretty quickly say, we are good to go with this list if Hamas is as well, and we'll see what we can do. Notably, what that 20-point list doesn't include is explicit assurances that Israel won't one day try to overtake and occupy the West Bank. And also unclear what becomes of the Palestinian Authority, which of course has been there for so long, not really in charge of this situation in any way, but arguably a political entity that could be stood up to help run a reestablished and reinvigorated and rebuilt Gaza. So again, all of this subject to conversation, but Netanyahu was made to understand, at least on Monday, if not before, that the president, his lead negotiator for this, Steve Witkoff, the administration overall, was pretty serious about making sure that attempts were still being made to get to a peaceful resolution.
Ed O'Keefe with that breaking news. Thanks so much, Ed. To Illinois now, where more than a dozen protesters arrested at a demonstration outside an ICE facility in a Chicago suburb. The rally happening around the same time. Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem was spotted on the roof of that facility. Here's coverage from CBS News, Chicago.
And you see some of these tense moments we've watched unfold here this morning. Protesters clashing with agents, and really the biggest difference this morning, aside from the